Welcome to Bethlehem Church online in Jefferson, PA. I'm Pastor Tim, and Bethlehem is a community-minded, family-focused, passionate church. We gather people to help them find their God-given purpose. We are so grateful that you're tuning in because we believe God will speak to you through this message tonight. Make sure to stay afterwards so that we can help you find your next steps in your faith. Enjoy. We are on our third week of the message series, Naked and Unafraid. Naked spiritually and emotionally, not physically. And this idea that God calls us to be vulnerable and open in the relationships around us, in our relationship with Him, so that we can risk what He has called us to do, so that we can have the reward that's for us both here on earth and in heaven. This idea of taking a step and being vulnerable without necessarily knowing what's coming up next, but believing that God is there. It's a message series by Team Church, and as we've been starting this off each and every week, we've been starting it off with the same prayer. So I'm going to ask you to repeat after me as we say this prayer yet again, just believing that God's going to show up today. So please bow your head and repeat after me. Dear God, my heart is open. My mind is ready. Make me better, God. Through your word, I receive it. I believe it. I won't be the same again. Amen. So as we continue this message series and we pray this prayer, I just want to kind of go back a little bit and just quickly recap what we talked about. Week number 1 of Naked and Unafraid, right? We talked about this idea that we are supposed to encounter the fear of exposure and overcome it. That was called the fear of exposure. We talked about people who like to sit in the window and watch at a distance, never truly being engaged and involved, and how King David danced in the streets like God called him to and worshiped and participated with the things that was around him, and how God calls us to be street dancers, not window watchers, and how God calls us, right, I handed out rubber bands and said God calls us to be stretched, not broken from not resting or broken from stretching too hard, but stretched so that we can be uncomfortable, so that we can grow into who He's called us to be and how He's called us to be it. Last week, we talked about abandoning smallness, about how sometimes we encounter smallness in our life, pettiness, divisiveness. We kind of fence our heart, fence our mind, fence our souls and our spirits in. But God did not give us a spirit to be timid, but of power and love and truth and strength, and how we're supposed to overcome those things and have and encounter shalom, completeness, and peace in our life. And then, of course, this week, if you can't tell by what's on the screen and what I've told you already, we're talking about pushing past criticism. How to have courage even when they are critics. For those of us who have been alive more than a week, you have probably had a critic in your life. As you are stretching, as you are growing, as you are moving, there are always critics, right? About what you wear, about what you didn't wear, about what you said and what you didn't say, that emotional reaction you had and the emotional reaction you didn't have, right? There are always critics speaking and pushing and telling people things. And I believe that there's a lot of people out there who are afraid to take that next step in their faith or afraid to take that next step in their life because they're afraid of the critics who just speak into their life. And so the critics are keeping you trapped. And then you are starting to focus down that smallness and that pettiness. And then you start to be afraid of exposure. Next thing you know, you're in the window instead of dancing in the street. But I kind of understand why, right? Many of us have seen people on the news step up into leadership. Their lives get magnified. All their problems get put on TV. Next thing you know, they're canceled. I see why people don't want to be involved in leadership. But I want to tell you today that we're all a leader in some form or fashion. Whether you believe it or not, it doesn't matter. My definition, you don't have to agree with me, my definition of leadership is the ability to influence or persuade. And I firmly believe that you always have the ability to persuade and influence at least 2 people. Whether you agree with me or not, I don't care. At least 2 people. You always have the ability to influence and persuade yourself. Yes, you're a person. That's 1. All right, maybe you won't agree with the second one, but I also believe that God always puts us in a relationship with some other person. A coworker, a neighbor, someone a million miles away in a foreign country, that you have the ability to speak truth and influence. There's always someone else that you can help persuade and influence in your life. And so while none of us will probably be, commanders of giant armies or a mega church pastor or the ability to influence and lead hundreds or thousands of people, we are all called to leadership in different ways. And right now, our world, our country, our church, your family, your neighborhood needs leaders more than ever. But what? We face criticism. Just look at the passage we read today. I'm going to reread it for you today. This is Jesus speaking, and this is what he says about criticism. Now, before I read it, when I say the words, they say, I'm going to point at you, and I need you to say, they say. So we only have to say it twice in this passage, but as I get ready and I point at you, we're going to do a practice run. You ready? They say. Good job. You're awake this morning. Wow, making me happy. All right. This is Jesus talking, right, in Matthew 11. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say, he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved right by her deeds. See what Jesus is saying? He's saying, you see John the Baptist, the one who came to prepare the way for me? He lived a life as an ascetic, almost like a modern-day monk, trying to be as pious and as careful as he could. He didn't drink anything, didn't hardly eat anything but locusts and honey, right? He's trying to live as close to the Jewish purity laws as he can. And you know what they say? What they criticize him for? He's a demon, right? Oh, man, no one can be that perfect. Oh, man, no one can have those problems, right? John the Baptist did sin, but they say these bad things about the guy who prepared the way for Jesus. And then he says, you know who the Son of Man is? Right, that's me. He's talking about himself in third person. He says, because I came doing the opposite of John the Baptist, meeting and eating and being with the tax collectors and the people who have less than reputable reputations. They say, oh man, the Son of Man, he's a glutton. He's a drunkard. Oh man, he shouldn't be friends. He says, they're criticizing me, right? And I think as we look at this passage, Jesus is saying, look, there's always going to be critics. There's always going to be the they-sayers, right? The they-sayers will always be around us. You can't get away from it. But I want to encourage you today, as you look at the they-sayers, to realize this, that what they say is hearsay. 9 times out of 10, maybe even 9.9 times out of 10, usually what they say is hearsay. When we encounter people who come up to us, right? I've had this multiple times, not often, but regular enough to have experience with it, and they come to me, oh, Pastor, do you hear what they're saying? Oh, who's they? If you ask that question, well, I can't tell you. Well, no, I can't help you if you can't tell me. Well, I'm not sure. Well, the biblical mandate is that if someone has an issue, they're supposed to come up to me. So by biblical rights, I can't handle it unless you tell me who it is so I can address it. I promise I won't get it out. If you push them, 9.9 times out of 10, they is them. And the 0.1 out of 10 is usually 1 or 2 other people that they've then convinced or manipulated to believe their ideology and view, right? They say is usually hearsay if you push them far enough and if you try to. And so if you have they-sayers in your life saying bad things about you, guess what? You're in good company. If you're doing the will of God and people are they-saying, congratulations, you're like John the Baptist and Jesus. You're not you're not sinless like Jesus, but right, you're in great company. And so what I want to do is I want to share with you some quotes that I have found helpful, some quotes about naysayers and the critics in our life that I just wanted to give you a little bit of encouragement. The first one is this. It's attributed to Aristotle, but it's not from Aristotle, but I don't care who said it because it is that good. It is that good. I posted this on Facebook this past week, so if you see this, it looks familiar, you know why. All right. There is only one way to avoid criticism. There's only one way. Do nothing, say nothing, be nothing. Right? And then you'll still be accused of being lazy for being nothing, right? All right, this is my other one. This one, if you're someone who gets their opinion or your feelings hurt really well, you might want to pull your heels or curl your toes under, right? This one's going to step on a few toes, but that's okay. It's by Zig Ziglar. He says this, don't be distracted by criticism. Remember, the only taste of success some people have is when they take a bite out of you. Ooh. The only success some people maybe ever have is when they, right, take a bite out of you. Right, this past week, ironically, as I've been planning to preach this message for a long time, and studying it and praying about it and stuff, I actually have been meeting with a friend who I'm pretty close with. I'm a few years older than him, but not much. He's a pastor, and he's really, really ironically been struggling with criticism, right? God always brings these sermons out whenever I need to deal with them and whenever I need to help with either with myself or someone else, and he's been dealing with it. And he's struggling. He didn't think he would struggle this much, but I personally think he's a good pastor. Can't have too much. Can't think bad things. I've heard him preach. I think he, believes in God with his whole heart. He really cares about the people. But the past month or so, he's had someone in his church who's just been a thorn in his side. Right? They're upset simply because sometimes his sermons go 25 minutes. Right? Sometimes I'm kind of like, what? They're used to 15 to 20 minutes, and sometimes he's 20 to 25. And, if church goes longer for an hour, only one person, right? Only one person is just so upset, right? They can't sit for that long, right? They're just so upset that the church can sometimes go 5, 10 minutes too much longer than it has to be. Some of you are laughing and scoffing, but this person is going around the church telling people that trying to rally the troops to cut something out, right? This person's sending nasty emails, right? They can't sit for that extra 5 minutes, but they can sit for a 2-hour drive to Penn State game. They can sit for 3 hours to knit, but they can't handle that 5 more minutes of the message. And he's been struggling, and I've been trying to help him and push past his criticism and how to handle it. And he's doing really well, but if he's not careful, it's going to wear him down. In fact, he admitted to me this past week that something did kind of wear him down. In fact, a week or two ago, he was preaching something. He had something on his heart. He wasn't quite yet done, but he looked down on his watch, and it was at like 22 minutes, and he said, well, I'm just not going to say that. And then he said, well, Tim, I don't think I should have done that, but that criticism was slowly starting to eat away at me. Now, he's doing well. He's not fighting back. He's not retaliating. He's not mad. But if he's not careful, it's going to wear him down week after week after week until he becomes weak, maybe gives up, caves in, move churches, all because of 5 to 10 minutes, right? This is the criticism. And if we let people who are critical of us control what we're doing for God, not for ourselves, but for God, then we can't take that next step that God's called us to. Right? There's 2 stories I want to share with you real quick about David and how he encountered criticism. I want to share a couple different Bible stories today because I want to show you that it happens to sometimes what you think are the best and the strongest people. And most of them, not all of them, most of them, right, handle it in a way that we should handle them as well too. So many of us know the story of David and Goliath. How many people have heard that story before? Right? Not everyone's hands up, but most of your hands are up, so I'm going to tell it to you anyway. Right? Little David, the little shepherd, right, goes down to visit his brothers. Eventually, after a whole bunch of things happen, he takes care of a 9-foot giant, pretty tall giant, by throwing a rock, square between the eyes, knocks him dead. Right? That's a story, long shot, right? But in 1 Samuel 17:28, when David is down there visiting his older brothers, right, one of his brothers says this to him. In fact, his oldest brother, when he's down there getting ready to just visit them, to give them things, to prepare them for war, his older brother says this. Right? When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? You catch it? He says, burned with anger. Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? Right? A few more things he says to him, but he's mad. You don't belong down here, David. You're just being nosy. This isn't your place. Your place is in the field. Your place isn't here. We know the end of the story. His place was there, but his biggest critic was his oldest brother. Another story. First, I guess I don't have that one on there. 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 3 and 4. Let me read it for you. David and his men were actually out patrolling the area, and they left their family in a town. And this is what happens when they come back. 1 Samuel 30, verses 3 and 4. When David and his men reached Ziklag, they found it destroyed by fire, and their wives and sons and daughters captive. So David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. You catch that? They're out there doing the will of the country and protecting their country, protecting the borders, and they get back home, and their wives and their children are gone. And it says they wept so hard they have no more energy left to weep. But in verse 6, it says, David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters. That then not only were they all mad together, but they were so mad they wanted to kill David. And he was distressed, right? So before it was his older brother, now it's his closest friends and colleagues. They want to kill him. But in verse 6 it says, the second half, but David found the strength in the Lord. But David found his strength in the Lord. He didn't find it in himself. Didn't find it in his critics, didn't find it in his family. He found his strength in the Lord. And you can probably guess what happens at the end of the story, right? He goes back, they reconquer the people who have taken their people, and it works out for good. But David isn't afraid, you can see here, to face the critics, right? He's emotionally moved, he's upset by him, he's distressed by him, but he still continues to do what God has called him to do in the face of critics. I personally believe in our first week story when Mikhail's in the window and David's dancing in the street, that when David was going home, he knew it wasn't going to be all rainbows and butterflies. He knew he was going to get in trouble for doing that, but he didn't care. And so we should learn from this that people who sit in windows are often, or are, the greatest critics of those who dance in the street. People who sit in the windows, watching, removed, distant, are the greatest critics of those who are down there working and moving. And unfortunately in my life, some of my biggest and worst critics have also been the people who I thought I could trust, the people who I thought I could pour into, the people who I thought had my back. In fact, two of the most best decisions I've ever made in my life, not the top two, but definitely in the top five, two of those I experienced the most resistance and criticism I've ever had. The first one was I was down in New Orleans studying how to build boats. I had this Bible study with people in my same campus ministry, these guys who I really trusted, people who I really poured into. And when I said, hey, I don't really think I'm supposed to be down here anymore. Hey, I think I'm going to change colleges, change majors, leave the fraternity. I think this is what God's calling me to do. Instead of being, oh yeah, Tim, I'm glad you're following God. Oh yeah, Tim, you go and follow your way. You know what they said? They're like, I don't think so. You shouldn't leave New Orleans. Stay here with your friends. That's a dumb idea. That's a stupid idea. You want to go to that college? Don't go to that college. Oh, come on, Tim. You can just stay here and stay as late. They were criticizing me for my decision, and I kept saying, no, I think God's calling me. And they almost persuaded me, if I wasn't so stubborn and so Pennsylvania Dutch, and so I'm going to do the opposite of what you tell me to do, I might have stayed down in New Orleans for another few years before I ever answered the call. I may not answer the call at all. But I think that was one of the best choices I've ever made in my entire life. I don't regret it whatsoever. Don't regret some of those friendships that were fractured because of it. And to this day, many of them are still, unfortunately, window watchers, the ones I have contact with, always afraid of trying to do anything new. Another story. When Sasha and I were asked to go and start a new church, do a church plant, parachute drop, where you just kind of drop into a community with nothing. Surprisingly, the people who were the most supportive, people in my church, my family, my friends. The people who are the least supportive, my colleagues who are pastors. Wow, right? Like, oh, Tim, I don't know if you should try that. I don't know if I would do that. That's only going to end poorly. I don't think you should do. They were the most critical people. Honestly, they were the worst. I didn't even want to even tell half the people because they just said bad things about you. But you know what? Sasha and I, to this day, think it was one of the best choices we've ever made. The miracles we saw happen, the experiences we have, the blessings we had and just went through, and the thing, it was the way it stretched us and made us uncomfortable, and the discomfort was brilliant. Most of my colleagues now, who have said that, still sitting in the window. Oh, I'm not sure I can even move a flag in the church. I'm not sure we should even do a church sign. I don't know if I could convince people to buy a church sign that says I love Bethlehem Church, right? That's a little bit too risky, right? They're not willing to live a naked and unafraid life. Right? I think sometimes we just end up letting the Statlers and Waldorfs control us. You know who the Statler and Waldorfs are? And you ever seen the Muppet Show, right? It's time to turn the music at the Muppet Show tonight, right? Some of us seen the Muppet Show. I know it makes it maybe feel it's a little bit pre my generation, but it's mostly your generation, right? You know this, Statler and Waldorf. You didn't know their names, but you know them, right? What do they exist to do in the Muppet Show? Criticize. That's all they do, right? Like the only two real full human puppets. And all they do is sit up in the balcony, right? Being critical, being cantankerous, curmudgeonly, old men, just mad. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of what they say is the funniest stuff on the Muppet Show, right? It's hysterical, right? And sometimes they're not wrong, but I don't want to empathize too much with them. But right, think of it from like an actual Muppet in the Muppet Show reality world, like from the perspective of the Muppets. Like, it's horrible. Have you ever once seen Statler and Waldorf come down out of the balcony and actually do anything? No, they're too busy criticizing. I think, what would the show look like if they got down on the stage with Miss Piggy and Kermit and Gonzo? Do you think that would look any better? Do you think the show would look better if they listened to these critics? No. So why are we letting the Statlers and Waldorfs, the Monday morning armchair quarterbacks, right, the backseat drivers, The opinionated people on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and YouTube control what we say and what we do. God's plan is too big and too strong and too powerful for us to let naysayers and the they-sayers to speak criticism into our life that's not helpful, that's not part of God's plan for us. Right? In fact, a lot of times when we encounter people like the Statlers and the Waldorfs in life, and in my personal experiences, it's not usually you. 90% of the problem is usually something else. 10% of the problem could be you, usually less. Usually when people are criticizing you and condemning you and saying all these nasty, mean things, very rarely are you the sole and singular and most important problem. Usually they're almost guaranteed there's something else going on in their life, right? And they're not dealing with it. They're not wrestling with it. And if you step back and don't retaliate, right, you're going to see from afar that their life is kind of spinning out of control. And I learned this a few years ago, and I think it's helpful to repeat it, and I think it's helpful to encourage you. The reason they're hurting you is because they're hurt, right? Hurt people hurt people. I'm not just repeating myself. One's a noun, one's a verb, right? Hurt people hurt people. They're dealing with some hurt that they just can't wrestle with, they just can't fix, they just can't overcome, and they are hurting others because of it. And I wish I could say that the church is a safe place where there's no hurt people, but unfortunately, we have tons of hurt people here. And unfortunately, sometimes hurt people here will hurt people. In fact, I've been put on record, and so I'll say it again, saying that some of the nastiest, worst, most mean people you may ever meet could be sitting in the pew right next to you, right? I got a couple looks when I said that at our last service like this. And I said, I've said that before. I'll stand by it. And I remember saying it one time, and a man came up to me about 2 weeks later and said, Tim, how are you still a pastor here? I'm not offended by it, but I can't believe they didn't run you out with pitchforks. They didn't dock your pay. How did you get away with saying that? And I looked at Jeff, and I said, Jeff, you know how I got away with it? I said, simple psychology. And he said, how? Was it like a mind game? I said, no. I said, the people who need to hear that think I'm talking about the person next to them. He went, ooh. I said, yeah, the people who think that they're perfect and think they don't need change, who think they're not hurt, who thinks that they're not critics, those are the ones who are actually and usually the worst. I'm going to sit here a little bit. Maybe that makes us uncomfortable. Maybe we think, man, have I been that critical? Am I really that bad? If you're thinking that, good. If you're not thinking that, maybe this was directed to you. I don't know. I'm not going to spend too much time on talking to the critic today because that's not where I'm going, honestly. Right? I don't feel like it's important to spend time with people who want to live life in reverse. I want to live life in drive. And so I'll give you all the time in the world. If you want to take that next step and be vulnerable, I'll work 24 hours a day. Well, at least 20, 30. No, I'll spend as much time with you as I can. But if you just want to sit and complain and critique, I'm sorry. I'll pray with you. But, that's not the kind of criticism we need. The kind of criticism we need is what I call critique. And I think there's a difference between criticism and a critic and a critique. You see, I think critique is a healthy and helpful form of criticism. A critique is a healthy and helpful form of criticism. Right? I'm going to show you with this little image here what I mean. So most of us know a little bit about cholesterol. Some of us have to get our cholesterol tested or take medicine for it. We don't like it, but it's there, right? But you can't avoid all kinds of cholesterol because there's good cholesterol and there's bad cholesterol, right? The bad cholesterol is the LDL, right? I use it to mean lousy. The L doesn't stand for that, but L for me to remember is the lousy. As you see in this image, it's dumping bad stuff in your veins. I remember it as being bad because Lower Dauphin was our rival, and so it must be bad, LDL, Lower Dauphin. Anyway, I'm not anywhere near Lower Dauphin, but I can still not like them. Anyway, the LDL, right? But the HDL is a cholesterol that helps clean out the arteries. You actually need some HDL to be healthy. If you have no HDL, you're almost as unhealthy as having too much LDL, right? You need to have some HDL, and I remember it as being healthy because healthy HDL. All right, you get the picture, right? You have to have some HDL. You have to get your almonds and your omega-3 fatty acids, right? And your fish oil, all that stuff. You can't just completely ignore all cholesterol because then you ignore the HDL and you'll have no improvement, no help, right? And so we need to realize that there is some critique that is helpful and healthy. And it's a hard lesson to learn. I remember in seminary when I went to my first 2 preaching classes, I thought that all of the people in there were going to give me critique. I thought, wow, they're on the same journey I'm on. They have the same passions, the same ideas. all the things and everything they're going to say is going to be extremely helpful. Well, hate to break it to you, but pastors are just as sinful, especially seminary students, right? A lot of things what they were saying, what I found out was kind of rooted in their preferences, or rooted in jealousy, or rooted in a different ideology than I had. And many of the stuff that I thought was critiques, right, that they were telling me actually was criticism, and it wasn't helpful. But I actually let it change the way I preached and change what I was doing. And I came to the reality after my second preaching class that I'm not going to leave here needing to learn how to preach to seminary students, right? I don't think we have any seminary students watching or listening right now. Maybe I'm wrong, right? But that's not my goal. I don't need to have a theological treatise that I need to prevent and intellectually stimulate the academic minds of Jefferson, right? That's not my goal. My goal is to preach the gospel and give people applicable ways of how to live it. And so I realized that their critiques weren't critiques, they were criticism. Then a few years later, I met Sasha. And I said, hey, hun, I don't know if she was honey then, but she was honey now, right? Hey, can you help me with my message? I feel like I'm still kind of struggling to overcome some of these things that seminary taught me that I kind of need to unlearn. And she said, sure. And I thought, of course, she was so loving and so sweet. She was going to say, oh, well, you're just doing a wonderful job. I just love you. Just keep doing what you want to do. But those of you who know Sasha, know me too well, know that that's not how it went. That one Sunday, she was sitting in the back, taking notes, writing things down. Came with a list of like 6 or 7 things that I needed to change and I had to change. I didn't like it, right? You don't have to like critique, but she was carrying the gunk out, right? The HDL, she was the good cholesterol. And I realized that she was there to help me, not to harm me, not out of jealousy, not out of spite, not to try to get a better grade than me, right? She was there simply out of love. And so to this day, I still accept forms of critique if they're out of love and if they're helpful and they're healthy. But I still resist criticism if it's about, I don't like your hair. I don't like your outfit, right? That's not helpful. That's just you bringing me down. So what I want to do is I want to share a quick little list of the difference between what a critic says versus what a critique is. So I have a quick list. I won't take too much time. I could spend the whole sermon on it, but I won't. Here is what critics are. Critics are self-appointed, while a critique is invited. Right? Often you'll get criticism from people who you don't want it from, and those, you know what you need to do? And they go, oh, I just start running away, right? Versus, hey, can I help you? Or, hey, would you be willing to help critique my message? Right? Criticism exists to find fault, while a critique looks for ways to improve. Hey, have you thought about looking at it this way? Right? You are a horrible, dirty, rotten person. You said that word wrong 4 times on Sunday. A critic accuses, but someone who gives critique is an ally. A critic likes to tear you down, but a critique will build you up. Right? A critic complains, but a critique considers. A critic can be harmful, but a critique can be helpful. And last but not least, a critic likes to magnify the negativity. Like, oh my goodness, all I see is bad things. When a critique magnifies the positive. Now don't get me wrong, critiques can still hurt. They're still disruptive. You still go, oh, I don't know if I like it. You don't have to like it, right? But if it's there to build you up and encourage you, maybe you should listen. Maybe we should get better, right? In fact, I say this, you can't get better without letting others speak into your life. You can't. That's not possible. You cannot. This is a fundamental truth. You cannot get better without letting others speak into your life. Think about professional athletes. The only way they get 1% better is they have coaches. The best basketball players, football players, the best CEOs, and healthy nuts, right? They have coaches for the coaches' coaches, right? You need to pick your elbow up a little bit. You need to work on your footwork. You need to look on your vision. You need to make sure you have a healthy life balance. The only way we can get better is this. 2 proverbs for us to prove this. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. If you want to be sharper, find someone else to help make you sharper. You can't do it on your own. Proverbs 9:9. I like this one. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be wiser still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in his learning. You want to be wise? Find someone wiser. If you think you're the wisest, you need to find someone who's wiser because you're not the wisest, right? If you want to be stronger, find someone who's stronger. If you want to be healthier, find someone who's healthier. If you want to grow in your faith, find someone to grow in your faith. Even I, your pastor, have a mentor and a coach. Why? Even though I'm ordained and I've graduated seminary and I've been a pastor for a decade, that doesn't matter. I've seen so many colleagues to say, well, I'm done with this. I don't need to increase. I don't need to get better. And I was like, no, I need someone. So I meet with someone monthly to try to help encourage me to be a better father, a better pastor, a better leader. I don't want to ever stop getting better until I'm dead, right? But know what else? Just because I'm not yet there and yet where I want to be, I'm still mentoring and guiding and helping and coaching other people. In fact, I have this Penn State student who wants to be a pastor, and I met with him almost every single week virtually to help him learn how to read the Bible. Because while you can read the Bible, there's definitely a wrong way to read the Bible, and there's also a good way to read the Bible. And I met with them and poured so much time in because they wanted to move forward. They were risking it in the streets, right? I have other pastors that I coach around the central Pennsylvania area because they want to move, they want to go forward. And so I want to encourage you to realize that this is how discipleship works. What I'm talking to you about isn't this basic discipleship 101, right? Jesus led the disciples led other people, right? And so it's our job to make sure that we have someone that we're following. We need to have a leader we're following, but we also need to have a follower we're leading. You catch that? Someone in front of us that is pouring into us so that then we can turn around and pour into the person behind us. And so if you don't have someone to follow, if you don't have someone to lead, do it. In fact, that's one of our challenges in the sermon notes this week is find someone to pour into or someone to pour into you, right? I believe we have wonderful, beautiful, awesome, amazing people in this church who are at different life stages with different skills and talents. Maybe someone who's really good at praying and you need to work on your praying. Maybe they're older, maybe they're younger, maybe someone who's really good and has a strong marriage and maybe you need help to work on your marriage, right? We have people here today. Don't be afraid to find someone to mentor or someone to be the mentee, right? We have that challenge. We have that ability. And as you take that next step, you will encounter criticism because you are breathing, because you are alive, because you are doing something. But let me leave you with this last message note. Never let criticism cause you to quit. Never let criticism cause you to quit. Push past those criticisms, right? Don't let them rest and stay in your soul. We talked about this a few months ago now, right? Don't let those negative lies stay in your life, but fill them with the truth about who Jesus is and what he's done for us, right? Ephesians talks about how God chose us before the foundation of the world. So who cares what a critic says? God chose us. Ephesians 1 says that we are blessed with every spiritual blessing. So who cares what someone says we're blessed with or we're not blessed with? God's given us every spiritual blessing. Psalms 139 says we are fearfully and wonderfully made, right? Like, come on, like we actually have some awesome and amazing gifts and talents. Don't let others speak negativity into you. Don't let that cause you to quit. Speak the truth that God says about you. And the last story I promise I'll give you today is from Nehemiah. How many of you have read or heard or know the book of Nehemiah, right? A few of you have your hands up. It's a book of the Bible, right? Not a very long one, towards the end of the Old Testament. But I bet you didn't know this. How many of you knew that he was the shortest man in the Bible? Anyone know that? The way we know that is because he was knee-high. That's why he's Nehemiah. Oh, I was making sure you're still awake. If I hear groans, I know you're awake. Sorry, that was a dad joke. It went over like a lead balloon, but that's how they're supposed to go. Anyway, Nehemiah, right? Lived in Persia, was a cupbearer for a king. God says, hey, Nehemiah, go to Jerusalem. I know you've never been there, but you're part of my people. Go and rebuild the city. He goes down, surveys the city. He realizes that morale is low, poverty is high, and that he's gotten himself into a really big mess. And so he starts rebuilding the city. And the first thing that happens when he starts rebuilding the city, he gets criticized. Right? What else do you expect? That's what we're talking about today. He gets criticized. People complain, tell him how horrible he is, why he shouldn't be doing it. His life gets threatened so much so to where the Bible talks about how he gave his man a hammer in one hand and a sword on their belt or a sword in the other. Can you imagine that? Right? Like that's how bad it is, like how much their lives are threatened for being criticized for what they're doing. And they keep calling him and pestering him and say, hey, we just want to talk, Nehemiah. Come here and have a friendly meeting. Hey, they keep sending him messengers and messages. And I love what he says here in Nehemiah 6:3. He says this, so I sent my messengers to them with this reply. And this is what he says directly to them. Very direct. I love very direct passages of the Bible. He says, I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Right? Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? I'm not going down. I'm not taking a lunch break. I'm not dealing with your pity party. You're not offering me critique. You're not giving me that HDL. You're the LDL trying to clog up my arteries, right? He stays up there building the wall, and eventually the wall goes to completion. In fact, if you go to Jerusalem today, you can still see the newer walls years ago, built on the walls that Nehemiah helped to rebuild, right? It's still standing this day. And while many of us, in fact, I don't know if any of us, right, aren't building a wall, God is helping us build a future, a legacy, a family, right? And maybe some of us are having to build it up from the rubble that existed from a broken marriage or a broken family or poor choices, or maybe we've had to tear some stuff down in order to rebuild it back up, and we want what's better. That's why we're here today. I want to give you some encouragement when you're building on things and people are criticizing you, people are making fun of your faith, or making fun of why you're doing things, or making fun of you being so committed to church, or just criticizing you for following God's plan of changing colleges or planting a church. This is my words of wisdom for you today. Don't come down. Don't come down. When you get that nasty email from that coworker who is hurting and they're just trying to hurt you, don't come down. When you get that mean text from that relative, and you know which relative I'm talking about, the one that always makes you feel guilty for being a bad grandma, makes you feel bad for being a bad mom, right? That one that just completely always just exists to say how horrible you're doing at life. Don't come down, right? When you get that phone call saying, Pastor, I don't like your hair. Don't come down. Turn to your neighbor and say, don't come down. Come on, turn to your neighbor. Tell him. All right, turn to your other neighbor and say, don't come down, with more emphasis. Don't come down, right? Don't waste your time, your energy, your effort on small-minded, petty people who only exist to criticize you. Spend time with those who want to critique you, right? Who want to help you and build you up, who want to mentor you. Spend time with those that you can mentor. But don't come down from the work God has put in front of you and be distracted. Let's pray. Gracious God, we're reminded of these words from Nehemiah today that just ring so true into our life. We, or many of our friends or family, are just dealing with critics right now. I'm not sure if it's the year, I'm not sure if it's a pandemic, I'm not sure if we're just petty humans, but it seems like critics are just around every single corner. Many of us can barely go a half day, a few hours, without feeling like someone is holding us back or trapping us in, or just saying of something that we should be doing better, and we didn't invite it, we didn't want it. They're not even speaking the truth, they're just hurting and they're trying to lash out. God, there are so many hurt people out there hurting us. Maybe we're that hurt person hurting other people, but God, we come before you now, helping us to get rid of the criticism in our own life, whether we're the ones giving it or we're the ones receiving it. Lord, help us to just shed that at the foot of the cross. Father, we pray that you help us to remain and keep our head above the water, to keep a sword in the one hand and a hammer in the other, right, working on the plan that you have for us. Father, forgive us the times where we've come down and engaged people when we should have just remained on the track. Forgive us the times where we've been the window watchers, where we have been that worst person that Pastor Tim was talking about in church today. Even though I don't think it's me, God, maybe it is me, right? Help us to not be a nasty person, but to be a person that follows your will, a person of integrity, a person of character. And Father, help us to look no greater example than Jesus, who didn't come down from the plans he had. He had Pharisees yanking at his ankles. He had Sadducees biting him at his feet, right? He even had Peter, right, pulling on him at some times. That's why he had to say, get behind me, Satan, right? Don't. Jesus did not come down. He could have taken the easy path, but he chose the right path. He was spiritually and emotionally and relationally vulnerable, naked, yet unafraid. Even on the cross, he was naked, yet unafraid of what would happen because he didn't answer to the critics. He only answered to you. So, Father, help us today to remember that love that Jesus had as we take communion. To remember that sacrificial love, that grace that he shared. To not just remember it, to be thankful. That you pour your Spirit out on all of us and on all the elements today as we take communion. Help us to be spiritually nurtured and be thankful. To take this meal as encouragement to leave here from this place and remember that we have a higher and greater and stronger plan than to listen to hearsay and what people say about us. Father, we just ask that you take this time to help us to be reflective and to help listen to what you're calling us to do, and to lay the things that we don't need anymore at the foot of the cross. We ask this in your name we pray. All God's people say, amen. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or want to get connected, we encourage you to go to mybethlehemchurch.com/next. And if you want to reflect or take some action steps, look here.